Here we are. I'm going to take that mask off because I can't put on my glasses with that mask on. I can't read. Well, here we are. October 31st, Halloween, a day when many Americans celebrate with costumes, haunted houses, horror movies, and of course, trick-or-treating. One of the few secular US holidays. So how did Halloween come to be? I was not aware of it, so I did some research in preparing for today's sermon. And I came to understand that it originates back 2,000 years to a Celtic 3-day festival called Samhain. And Samhain is the Gaelic word for November, and it also means summer's end. It was the celebration of the end of the harvest and the beginning of the dark half of the year. It also marked the Celtic New Year, and it was considered a magical time where the ghosts of the dead walked the earth, and when the veil between death and life was understood to be its thinnest. So I was curious, why had I never heard of Samhain? Right? I don't know. I don't know how many of you have heard of Samhain? Please raise your hand. Raise your hand. So I see many people that are UU folks probably have heard of this through maybe a previous service from Paul or other folks that have served this, but I think it's a curious thing that many people haven't heard of it. I talked to many people over the last few weeks about it. Lots of family and friends didn't know. So in our Christian culture, we're rarely exposed to beliefs that were considered pagan. And Hollywood, and when we hear the word pagan, right, what do we think? Hollywood has often equated paganism with satanic worship, which is not true. The word pagan is derived from the Latin word pagus, which means people of the countryside or rural district. It essentially meant the people of the land, farmers. And the term pagan was used by the Roman Empire originally to describe people that were not monotheistic. So pagan was the term used for people that were not Christian, were not Jewish, or were not Muslim. So as a liberal religious community in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning, it would serve us to dig a little deeper into Samhain, and also for me to think a bit about the human the human desire to transverse that veil between life and death. So a bit about what is Samhain and what went on in these celebrations. One second. So in the Celtic calendar, the year was divided into two halves, the dark half and the light half. And the year started with the dark half, which began at sunset on November 1st with the Samhain celebration. And the cycle ended when the light half began, which was at sunset on May 1st, which was the festival of Belethine. Both festivals were closely linked, but in general, Samhain was considered the major festival in that culture. So Samhain's transition from light to dark was a period of time where space and what we understood as reality became permeable and flexible, and spirits not only of the dead, but of the past or of other realities could wander into our reality, and humans could actually wander into that reality and get lost into the other world in this belief system. So the veil between life and death was at its thinnest, and the dead and the living could commingle, which is obviously the root of Halloween and the celebrations that persist to this day. So as in all turning points in the Celtic year, the ancient lore told us that the gods also drew close to earth at Samhain, as did demons and ancestors. And to commemorate this event, the Druids, who were the Celtic priests and shamans, built these huge bonfires. And the people gathered around these bonfires to sacrifice and burn their crops. And they also sacrificed animals to the Celtic deities. They also offered personal prayers in the form of objects symbolizing the wishes that they hoped to create that year, and they cast those into this bonfire blaze. So extensive preparations were made for a communal feast at the same time, and that included inviting the dearly departed to attend these feasts. And to enable them to come freely, they left their doors and windows unlatched. And they made a special cake that was for only the consumption of those that were dead, that were coming back to visit. And if this was touched by any mortal's hands during the duration of the ritual period, it was a very sacrilegious behavior, and the person that touched these foods would be condemned to become a hungry spirit upon their death, banned from ever being fed. So beyond the great feast, the dead would also need to be entertained. So customs from one Celtic nation to another varied, but in general, young people played games that were associated with the rituals of Samhain, and elders would review all the events of the past year with their ancestors for the benefit of them to be aware of it, and to encourage their ancestors who were visiting to continue to take an interest into their affairs of the living. And during this celebration, the Celts also wore costumes, and they covered their bodies, and they often used animal heads and skins. They also carved pumpkins and gourds and turnips into scary masks. They did this to trick the demons so that demons wouldn't recognize them. They didn't want the demon spirits crossing over and having any connection with them. So it was very clear they wanted to connect and give gifts to the gods. They wanted their ancestors to come, but they wanted to keep the demons away. And these demons that they wanted to keep away, they felt were responsible for a high level of infant mortality, which was actually normal in those years. Infants, often 20 or more % of the infants would pass before the age of 5. And they also felt that the demons would damage their crops. So these demons were often known as she's, the word she. And you've probably heard the word banshee. Have you ever heard the term banshee? That came from these demons that were actually fairies. And these demon fairies in England and Ireland and Scotland were nothing like the Disney fairies. They were terrifying, they were dangerous, they were huge, and you had to do everything you could to keep them at bay and keep them satisfied and away from you. So to this very day, if you travel to Ireland, and I'll be traveling there actually this July with my dear friend Bridget, who's on here. I don't know if any of our other friends that are traveling there will be on this trip, but what I've come to understand is that they have, there's these things called fairy mounds or fairy forts that are littered the Irish countryside, that have openings in them, that it's believed that these could be either burial grounds or portals to the underworld. And the Irish leave them completely alone. They don't touch them. They build their highways around them. If they have fields, they mow around it. They leave it completely completely left be. So I'm very curious about these, and I'm looking forward to searching some out. Sound good, Bridget? We're going to do that? All right. Hmm. So Celts thought that the presence of the otherworldly spirits made it easier for the Druids and the Celtic priests to make predictions about the future. Right? I see Cassandra nodding. I see other folks nodding. And that's also a practice that's gone on until this very day. So people lived in a very volatile world, and these prophecies were very important for them for the long dark winter, and this gave them a certain level of comfort. And upon the ending of these ceremonies and these fires, everybody would take a little bit of the flame home to light their hearth for the winter and the dark months, and that would give them protection. So the Samhain fires still continue to this very day. And through those years and up to now, they often will take the ashes of the bonfire and they will scatter them through the fields. And this would be also another form of their protection. But it also improved the soil, because the ash also is a very positive thing to add to fields. So the truth is, the information about Samhain has just been passed along by word of mouth, mostly, for hundreds, thousands of years, like many other indigenous people. One of the things, though, that we believe was connected to Samhain was the fear of bats and the connection of bats with this time of year and Halloween. See, as they built these fires, the insects would be attracted to the light. They were very rarely out in the dark. So they felt that the bats would come and feed on the insects that were gathering around the Samhain fire. Thus, they saw the demons in the bats and their attraction to the light and their desire to feed on these insects. So, okay, so how did Samhain become Halloween, and how did it morph into what we're doing these days and in our culture? So, like the Celts, the Romans also had festivals for the dead, as did many people. And the Romans held their festival in May, and it was called Limura. And it was to ward off their evil spirits of the dead. So as the Catholic Church's strength grew and their desire to influence Europe continued, and they frowned on the pagan rituals, of course, like Limura and Samhain. They, in I think it was 609, Pope Boniface created a feast called the Feast of the Martyrs to coincide with the Roman tradition and to take over the Roman holiday. And 2 centuries later, Pope Gregory moved that same holiday to the Samhain holiday, to November 1st, and they named it All Saints' Day to honor their martyrs, their saints, and their deceased faithful. And then 100 years later, it was also added the day called All Souls' Day, where Catholics would pray for the souls of those that were stuck in purgatory. Ultimately, as they intended, the Catholic Church, All Saints and All Souls' Day, deterred from the pagan gods of Limura and Samhain and brought the attention to the Catholic saints and to those that had been on the other side. But the rituals of Samhain have morphed and continue to remain in Ireland, Scotland, and England, and their practices are still part of the culture. All Saints. So how did Halloween actually come about? Many of you are aware of this, but for those who don't know, All Saints' Day was known as All Hallows' Day, for the hallowed, the holy. And Halloween being the night before All Hallows, it was All Hallows Eve or Hallows Eve or Halloween. But how did this come to America? The American tradition of trick-or-treating originated on All Souls Days parades, when the poor citizens of England and Ireland would beg for food, they would often receive something called soul cakes that were exchanged for prayers for the givers of these prayers. So when they knock on your door, they beg for food, and they would pray for your family. So if you've not heard of these soul cakes were round cakes that looked like a short biscuit, and they were also called souls. And the people that went around doing this, knocking on the door and offering of prayers, were called solars. And it was also called going Samhain, when you went door to door. And it came to America with the wave of Irish immigrants during the potato famine. They brought their holiday customs, which remained part of their culture, which included bobbing for apples and playing tricks on neighbors. The young pranksters in those days would wear masks so they couldn't be recognized. And the tradition of the harmless tricks actually grew into something that was more towards vandalism at some point, and became an issue back in the 1930s. And it almost became like an extortion deal. Like if you didn't give them what they wanted, they would do something bad to your house. So you had to do something to appease these young folks that were causing a lot of chaos. So storekeepers and neighbors began to give them treats, began to give them candy, and it was an encouraged act of going door to door for treats, instead of the more of a difficult experience that was happening at that time. And the storytelling continued. So here we are, entering into our Halloween time and our dark half of our year. There is an aware of the cycles of life and nature that none of us can ignore right now. There's an awareness of this. Nature is dying back, and it's time for harvest. And we become aware of the darkness and the cold to come, and we prepare for it, just as the Celts did 2,000 years ago. So as in the Christian and the pagan and the Wiccan and the Mexican cultures, there's a quality in many who hope to reconnect to those who have gone before. There's something about this time of year that awakens that desire. Whether we believe in afterlife or not, there is a yearning to keep their memory alive in our minds and in our souls and in our hearts. And this need of wanting to remain connected to our loved ones on the other side is an essential quality of being human. You see it in every tradition. It's in our DNA. So I'm not gonna pronounce this correctly, but in looking at these common festivals of Old Souls, Samhain, and Dia del Muerte. Did I say that right? No? Okay. Debbie, can you unmute and say that correctly?
Dia de los Muertos.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Apologize to my Latin friends and speakers. I think they all recognize one thing, all these festivals. And for each of them, the core is saying that love has no end. It has no end. It lives on. It's part of us. And there's nothing we can do except be grateful for that. So in closing, my invitation to you all is to take that love and that gratitude for those that have come before you into your lives this week. It is difficult. It is difficult for me. I know for all of us. sometimes to think about being grateful for those that have passed. But what I try to do is be grateful for the time I had with them. And I invite you to think about that too. For what would my life or our lives be without those loved ones that we had? So, I leave you with this wish. May you bring that love and gratitude into your life as we reap this harvest and give thanks for being alive. May you keep this love alive by sharing it with those who enter your world and who light your path. And may you in turn light the path for others. Blessed be, and may it be so. If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.